Okay, so let's dive right into this explainer. What we're doing today is decoding a text that proposes a kind of hidden operating system running in the background of world events. The idea is to go beyond just observing history and actually become a forensic auditor of it. And the source material kicks things off with this really powerful metaphor. It's asking us to think about a pretty provocative idea. What if all the chaos, all the destruction we see, is just smoke? A distraction, designed to keep us from seeing the real fire, the core logic that's burning just out of sight. And that fire is what this source calls the Promethean algorithm. Now, this isn't about a conspiracy in the typical sense. It's described more like a computer's operating system, a set of rules and protocols built on a very specific fear-based logic. And our goal here is to really understand that blueprint. So how does it work? Well, the source claims this entire system is built on 4 key protocols, and you can really think of them like the fundamental lines of code that tell this operating system what to do. Let's break them down one by one. All right, first up is something the source calls the fragmentation protocol. Its whole job, its entire purpose, is to take things that are powerful and whole and just smash them into smaller, more manageable, and ultimately much weaker parts. So let's look at the logic here, because it's pretty interesting. It starts with a core concept that the world isn't one living thing, it's just a collection of separate parts. The cause? A deep-seated fear of anything that can't be measured or controlled, the wild. So the operation is to break everything down. Communities become individuals, land becomes plots, time becomes hours. And here's the kicker, the siphon. Once everything is broken into tiny pieces, it's way easier to tax and control every single one of them. And this slide just illustrates the result perfectly, right? You start with a spring, something that's described as powerful, collective, whole, and totally self-sustaining. But through fragmentation, that spring gets turned into a whole series of individual taps. Each one is weak, metered, and completely dependent on the larger system for its flow. So that's fragmentation. Protocol 2 builds directly on top of that idea. It's called the artificial scarcity engine, and its entire job is to create a sense of need where there wasn't one before. So according to this framework, the basic concept is that for something to have value, you first have to have lack. The source says this comes from a winter scarcity mindset, one that just doesn't get natural abundance. So what's the operation? You systematically dismantle local self-sufficiency to create need. And the siphon? Well, think about it. A person who is hungry for food, for money, for approval, becomes a predictable utility. They become someone whose actions are very, very easy to control. Okay, so after fragmentation and scarcity, what's next? That brings us to the third piece of the blueprint, the standardization trap. This is where the system goes from creating need to making sure everyone is the same. The logic here is all about order, this idea that order is the only thing preventing total chaos. The source suggests this comes from a deep-seated fear of the unpredictable, natural flow of culture and life. The operation, then, is to enforce one single system for everything. One language, one education system, one way of banking. And why? What's the siphon? It's all about efficiency. It is way easier to extract resources from a standardized consumer who fits perfectly into a global grid. So this creates this really stark contrast. On one side, you've got what the source calls the sovereign soul, who is whole and unpredictable, living by that logic of the free-flowing spring. And on the other, you have the standardized consumer, who is fragmented, predictable, and lives by the logic of the grid. And that brings us to the final protocol, which is maybe the most psychological of all of them. It's called the mirror projection. You could also just call it large-scale gaslighting, really. Okay, so get this. The core thought process is something like, if I am disconnected, then everyone else must be too. The cause is a need to justify a lost connection to nature or spirit or whatever you want to call it. The operation is to use media and culture to frame a more natural, sovereign way of being as backward or primitive. And the siphon, this is the most effective part. You do it to yourself. You voluntarily hand over your power just to catch up. You become, in the source's own words, the technician of your own robbery. So this brings us to the core motive. Why? Why would a system like this even exist? Is it just pure evil? Well, according to the source, it's actually a bit more complex than that. It's framed not as some conscious act of malice, but as a survival logic, one born out of deep, deep fear and insecurity that has just been scaled up and up until it became a global empire. It's a system that craves control because it is terrified of what it can't control.
Which, of course, raises the big question, right? If this all-encompassing system is really in place, what in the world can anyone possibly do about it?
And the answer the text gives is, well, it's probably not what you'd expect. It suggests the solution isn't to go out and fight the machine head on. It's about a massive shift in perspective, realizing that the power dynamic isn't at all what it seems. See, the argument is that this entire machine is actually fundamentally insecure. It's described as a parasite. It needs your energy, your spring, because deep down it doesn't have any of its own. It needs your future because it has no life in it. Its power is entirely based on what it takes, not on what it can create. So once you adopt this framework, the source says your entire perspective can shift. Familiar institutions start to look very, very different when you put on the glasses of a forensic auditor. You no longer see a bank as just a place for money. You see a siphon designed for extraction. A school is no longer just a place for education. It's a programming station designed for standardization. And what was once presented as comforting order through this lens is revealed as a cage designed for control. And that leaves us with one final provocative thought to take away. If we accept the source's central metaphor, we really have to ask ourselves, in a world so full of distractions, what else have we been mistaking for smoke while the real fire burns just out of view?